A woman, pregnant with quintuplets, was abandoned and humiliated by her partner, who left her for another. On the day of his wedding, she makes a surprise appearance and reveals a truth so shocking that it leaves all the guests completely speechless. Before you watch, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're from so we can bring you even more videos. 5 heartbeats. The words of Dr. Anderson echoed in the examination room like thunder, causing Isabella to clutch the table so hard her fingers turned white. 5, she whispered in disbelief as the doctor pointed to each tiny pulse on the monitor. The world spun violently around her, abandoned just a month ago, without a home since discovering the fraudulent mortgage, and now this, quintuplets. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat, transforming into sobs that shook her whole body. "He said I'd never make it alone," she murmured through tears. At that moment, something fierce and crystalline awoke inside her, a savage determination that she herself didn't recognize. "I'll prove him wrong," she declared, her voice transformed, as she placed a protective hand on the womb that now carried not 1, but 5 reasons to never give up again. Leaving the doctor's office, the weight of the high-risk pregnancy diagnosis and the list of precautions and special care seemed to crush her shoulders. How could she afford the costs? How could she raise 5 children alone? His last words before he left echoed in her mind like a cruel sentence, almost a curse. The apartment, once a sanctuary of love, now felt like a prison of painful memories. Isabella spent hours lying on the sofa, hands resting on her still flat belly, trying to process the magnitude of what was to come. The sickly sweet aroma of the anniversary cake she had prepared with such care still lingered in the air like a ghost of shattered dreams. 3 weeks before this life-changing diagnosis, Isabella had experienced the most devastating moment of her life. The sweet smell of vanilla filled the small apartment as she adjusted the oven's temperature. Her skilled hands worked with meticulous precision, beating the cake batter that would symbolize 3 years of shared love. 3 years of laughter, dreams, and promises whispered late into the night. Have you ever felt that sensation that everything in your life is finally falling into place? That rare moment when the universe seems to be conspiring in your favor and the future stretches out before you like an illuminated road? That's exactly how Isabella had felt that autumn afternoon. As she carefully decorated the cake with small sugar flowers, her mind wandered between memories of the past and dreams of the future. The sound of the front door interrupted her thoughts. Her hands froze in midair, the pastry bag still suspended over the cake. Something was wrong. It wasn't the usual jingle of keys, nor the cheerful call that always announced his arrival. There was a heaviness in the air, a palpable density that made her heart race. Isabella. His voice was so different from normal, distant, almost cold. His eyes didn't meet hers, but stared at an undetermined point on the small kitchen wall. The hours that followed blurred into a series of words that cut like blades. "I can't do this anymore. I met someone else. I don't feel the same." Each phrase pierced deeper than the last, demolishing the sandcastle she had so carefully built. "How long?" she managed to ask, her voice almost unrecognizable even to herself. 6 months, he replied, and that number echoed in her mind like a funeral bell. 6 months. While she was planning surprises and believing in vows of eternal love, he was building a parallel life, an alternate universe where she didn't exist. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion as he collected his belongings. 3 years of a life together reduced to 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. When the door closed, the silence that filled the apartment was deafening. Isabella remained motionless, sitting on the cold kitchen floor, the now sickening aroma of the cake still permeating the air. On the table, an envelope with a few dollars, the physical definition of what she was worth to him. The small blue wrapper remained in the drawer, hiding the positive pregnancy test she never even had the chance to show him. Now, back in the present at the doctor's office, the shock of the quintuplets still reverberating through her body, Isabella felt something awaken inside her as she stared at the monitor. It was as if a stubborn spark refused to be extinguished. Pastry. That's what she had always been good at, ever since she was a child by her grandmother's side. The cakes that enchanted family and friends, the techniques she had perfected over the years, the family recipes carefully kept in a worn notebook. It was as if a door had opened in her mind. Why not? What did she have to lose? If the world wanted to knock her down, she would respond by rising even stronger. The next day, with her hair in an unassuming bun and dark circles that told the story of sleepless nights, Isabella walked into Mr. Green's small bakery, 3 blocks down from her apartment. "I need a job," she said simply, handing the gray-haired man a small box. Inside were 6 meticulously decorated cupcakes. Mr. Green looked at the sweets with a critical eye, then tasted one. His face transformed instantly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening into a genuine smile. "My dear, this is," he seemed to search for the right word, "extraordinary." That's how it began. A corner in Mr. Green's bakery, some basic ingredients, and Isabella's talented hands. The first month was one of trial and error, of constant doubts and small victories. Customers began to notice, began to ask for the new woman's cake, began to place specific orders. Meanwhile, her womb grew, sheltering the multiple miracles she carried. Medical costs were piling up, but now a small savings account was growing too. A savings account built with sugar, flour, and determination. News spread in the small town. A young pastry chef, pregnant with quintuplets, abandoned by her partner, building her own path with talent and perseverance. People started to show up not just for the taste of the sweets, but for the story behind them. They wanted to show support. They wanted to be a part of this unlikely journey. On one particularly busy afternoon, as Isabella delicately applied whipped cream to a row of cupcakes, the door chime announced the arrival of a new customer. She looked up and met the curious gaze of a tall man in a well-tailored suit. "I was told I'd find the best sweets in town here," he commented, approaching the counter. Isabella smiled politely, offering a small tasting. The man, whom she would later discover was Julian Thorne, the owner of a growing chain of hotels, savored the sweet slowly, closing his eyes to appreciate every nuance of flavor. "Impressive," he murmured. "Simply impressive." The next week, Julian returned with a proposal. He needed an exclusive pastry chef for the restaurant of his newest hotel, someone who could create unique desserts that would become the establishment's signature. "Why me?" Isabella asked, genuinely confused by the interest of such a successful businessman. "Because you put something in your sweets that you can't find anywhere else," he replied simply. "You put your soul." The offer was tempting. A fixed salary, a professional environment, the possibility of growth. But there were complications. Her pregnancy was advancing, doctors recommended rest, and soon there would be 5 newborns, demanding full-time attention. "I can't offer exclusive dedication right now," she explained, her hands unconsciously protective over her prominent belly. Julian's gaze fell on the gesture, and comprehension softened his features. "I know your situation," he admitted, "and my offer takes that into account. We can adapt ours, create a suitable space. The important thing is to have you and your talent." That was the first moment Isabella felt that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. That there was a possible path even in the face of the seemingly impossible. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to spring. Isabella's belly grew along with her reputation as a pastry chef. The suites at Julian's hotel became famous in the region, attracting specific customers to try her exclusive creations. She developed her own decorating technique, blending traditional methods with contemporary touches, creating pieces that were as beautiful to look at as they were delicious to eat. And then, in a whirlwind of events, the quintuplets arrived. 5 perfectly healthy girls, defying all statistics and pessimistic predictions. 5 little warriors who, like their mother, seemed determined to prove that the impossible was just a matter of perspective. The first few months were a test of physical and emotional endurance. Sleepless nights, constant worries, a complex logistical dance to care for 5 babies simultaneously. But Isabella was no longer alone. Mr. Green had become a kind of surrogate grandfather to the girls. Julian offered financial and emotional support, visiting regularly with gifts and words of encouragement. The community had mobilized, creating a support network that sustained Isabella in the most difficult moments. When the quintuplets turned 6 months old, Julian appeared with a different proposal. He wanted Isabella to have her own space, her own patisserie. He would be the investor. She would be the creative and administrative mind. "You proved him wrong," Julian commented as he explained the details of the business plan. "He said you'd never make it alone. But look around you. You didn't just make it, you flourished." The comment touched a still-open wound. Isabella rarely spoke about her ex-partner, about the abandonment, about the pain. She had channeled all that energy into her daughters and her art. But occasionally, in the quiet moments between tasks, the memory would return. The doubt would whisper, what would he think if he saw her now? The truth was, he had never tried to find out. He never tried to discover if the pregnancy had resulted in healthy babies. He never showed the slightest interest in the fate of Isabella or the daughters who carried his DNA. It was as if that part of his life had been completely erased, replaced by new characters, new scenarios. Isabella accepted Julian's proposal. The small space on the main street began to take shape, transforming into a cozy and elegant patisserie. The pastel-colored walls, the carefully lit display cases, the irresistible aroma that escaped whenever a customer entered or left. Everything reflected the personality of its owner. Sweet Dreams opened its doors on a sunny spring morning, when the quintuplets turned 1 year old. The 5 girls, dressed in coordinated colors, were the main attraction, enchanting customers with identical smiles and already distinct personalities. That night, after the successful grand opening, Isabella settled her daughters in their cribs and sat on the balcony of her new apartment. Larger and more comfortable, located above the patisserie. Looking at the stars, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection on the journey she had traveled. A year ago, she was shattered, facing an uncertain future with 5 lives depending solely on her. Now, she was the owner of a promising business, the mother of 5 healthy girls surrounded by people who genuinely cared. "You did it," she told herself. "You really did it." And that small voice of doubt, the one that used to echo his words, "You'll never make it alone," finally fell silent. What Isabella didn't know, as she savored this personal victory, was that fate still held one final encounter with the past in store, an encounter that would prove, once and for all, that sometimes the best revenge isn't retaliation, but simply living well and happily. After all, what better response to a broken promise than the construction of entirely new dreams? Comment below what you think Isabella's next big challenge will be. The aroma of caramelized sugar and fresh vanilla filled the small patisserie. Sweet dreams, as the golden morning light filtered through the large windows. Isabella adjusted the temperature of the main oven, her body moving with the familiarity of someone who knows every inch of that space. On the walls, framed with elegant simplicity, 5 identical photographs showed the same smile multiplied by 5. Her girls, now 18 months old, were captured in a moment of pure joy. Have you ever stopped to think about how life's greatest challenges can turn into our greatest blessings? How what seems to be the end of a path can, in fact, be just a redirection to a much more rewarding road. Sweet Dreams was celebrating its 6th month and was already a landmark in the city. What began as a corner in Mr. Green's bakery was now its own establishment, with a loyal clientele and a waiting list for special orders. The traditional family recipes gained contemporary touches in Isabella's talented hands, creating a unique signature that people traveled miles to experience. "Mommy, look!" The childish voice came from the small space in the back of the patisserie, specially adapted for the quintuplets. Sophia, the most expressive of the 5, pointed proudly to a colorful drawing where 5 little stick figures held what appeared to be cakes. Isabella smiled, kneeling to be at her daughter's level. "It's beautiful, my love. Is that you helping Mommy in the patisserie?" Sophia nodded energetically, her blonde curls bouncing. "When we get big, we're going to make cakes just like you." The simplicity of that phrase brought tears to Isabella's eyes. In the midst of the daily chaos of running a growing business and raising 5 children simultaneously, it was these small moments that reaffirmed her choice. The choice to move forward, to build something new, to turn pain into fuel for bigger dreams. The chime of the main door announced the arrival of the first customer of the day. Isabella adjusted her uniform, an elegant pastel apron with the patisserie's logo embroidered on it, and went to the counter with her best smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" The gray-haired woman on the other side of the counter was no ordinary customer. Annabelle Moore, a renowned food critic and columnist for the regional journal, was known for her demanding palate and merciless reviews. "I've heard that your pistachio and raspberry eclairs can transport someone directly to heaven," Annabelle commented, her shrewd eyes observing every detail of the environment. Isabella's heart raced, but her hands remained steady as she served the specialty. This moment could define the future of her small business. A positive review from Annabelle would mean visibility throughout the region. A negative one could jeopardize months of hard work. Annabelle bit into the sweet with deliberate slowness, closing her eyes to focus on the sensations. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. "In 25 years as a critic," she finally declared, "I can count on my fingers the times a sweet has genuinely left me speechless." Her eyes met Isabella's, and for the first time, a smile softened her severe features. "Congratulations, my dear. You're not just making sweets. You're creating experiences." That same afternoon, Julian appeared at the patisserie, carrying a bouquet of fresh lilies and the day's newspaper. In Annabelle's column, an enthusiastic review took up half the page with the title, "Sweet Dreams, the Empire of Flavors Built by Resilient Female Hands." "This deserves a celebration," Julian announced, his eyes shining with the same pride a father would show. In the months that followed that review, the small patisserie saw its business triple. Isabella had to hire 3 assistants to keep up with the growing demand. The menu expanded, incorporating new creations that blended tradition and innovation. The quintuplets, now chattering non-stop, became the unofficial mascots of the business, charming customers with their distinct personalities, despite their identical appearance. It was during this period of prosperity that Isabella received an unexpected invitation. The city council of a neighboring town was organizing a regional food festival and wanted Sweet Dreams to be one of the featured establishments. "I don't know if I can do it," Isabella confessed to Julian during a late dinner, after the girls were asleep. "The festival lasts 3 full days. How will I manage with the little ones?" "Julian, who over the months had become more than an investor, a friend, a support system, a constant presence in their lives, held her hand across the table. "You're not alone on this journey, Isabella. Never again." There was an intensity in his gaze that made something awaken in her chest, a warmth she had almost forgotten, a possibility she had buried along with her broken heart. The festival was a landmark event. The Sweet Dreams booth, decorated with elegant simplicity and pastel colors, attracted lines that stretched for yards. Isabella, aided by her assistants, and eventually taking turns with Julian to care for the girls, presented exclusive creations inspired by local culture. Her reinterpretation of the traditional bolo de rolo, with a touch of cardamom and a red berry glaze, was voted the dessert of the event. Journalists from larger, statewide publications approached, wanting to know the story behind this talented pastry chef and her quintuplets. Isabella shared her journey with caution, always emphasizing her triumph over adversity and never the abandonment. She spoke about how every obstacle had been a stepping stone to something greater, how every disappointment hid an opportunity. "If you could go back in time," a reporter asked, "would you change anything about your path?" The question caught Isabella by surprise. She looked at her 5 daughters, who were playing happily under Julian's watchful eye, and felt a crystalline certainty. "Not a single second," she replied with serenity. "Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it all brought me exactly to where I need to be." Upon returning to the city after the festival's success, Isabella found something unexpected in her mailbox. A formal proposal from a publisher interested in publishing a recipe book by her. "The Sweetness of Resilience, Recipes and Stories from an Unlikely Journey," was the suggested title. "I'm not a writer," Isabella protested, showing the letter to Julian during one of their now frequent dinners. "But you're a born storyteller," he argued. "Each of your sweets tells a story. Why not put them on paper?" That night, after the girls were asleep, Isabella sat at the small desk in the corner of her room and began to write. Not just recipes, but memories. The first time she made cookies with her grandmother at age 6, standing on her tiptoes to reach the counter. The birthday cake she had made for her father, clumsily decorated, but received with tears of emotion. The feeling of making her first professional sale at Mr. Green's bakery. And then, the more recent stories. How she discovered that Louisa, among the quintuplets, had a natural talent for separating egg yolks from whites without breaking them, even with her small hands. How Emily always chose the best strawberries when they went grocery shopping. How Mia, Sophia, and Charlotte would seriously discuss which frosting would look best on each cake, like little pastry experts. The words flowed, sometimes interrupted by tears. No longer tears of sadness, but of a deep gratitude for the path she had traveled. Isabella was rediscovering her history through writing, giving new meaning to every difficult moment in light of where she was now. The book was published 6 months later, coinciding with the quintuplets' 2nd birthday. The book signing at her own patisserie turned into a community event. People lined up not just to get their autographed copy, but to share how Isabella's story had inspired them in their own struggles. "Your book gave me the courage to start over after my divorce," a middle-aged woman confided, squeezing Isabella's hand with emotion. "I read your story to my teenage daughter who was being bullied at school," another customer shared. "She said that if you could raise 5 daughters and build a business from scratch, she can handle a few mean girls." Those words touched Isabella deeply. She had never imagined that her personal journey could impact so many lives beyond her own. She had transformed pain into purpose, despair into hope, not just for herself, but for others, too. The book's success brought new opportunities. A regional television network invited her to do a weekly segment on baking, Homeware companies wanted her to endorse their products. Invitations to give workshops in other cities poured in. Isabella chose carefully, always prioritizing what would allow her to balance her career and motherhood. The quintuplets remained her center, her moral compass, her reason for getting up every morning and persevering. On one particularly busy afternoon at the patisserie, while preparing a special order for a major wedding, Isabella received a call from the girls' preschool. Mia had fallen during recess and needed to be taken to the emergency room to check for a fractured wrist. Without hesitation, Isabella dropped everything and rushed to the school. At the hospital, while waiting for the X-ray results, holding a tearful Mia in her arms, and with the other 4 girls sitting quietly under the watchful eye of the teacher who had accompanied them, Isabella felt the weight of the unique responsibility she carried. It was at that moment that Julian appeared, out of breath from running from the parking lot, carrying 5 identical teddy bears. "I came as soon as I got your message," he explained, handing a bear to each girl and saving a special one, with a bandaged paw, for Mia. The little girl's eyes lit up with delight, momentarily forgetting the pain. "Look, Mommy, he's hurt just like me." Isabella looked at Julian, at the tenderness of that gesture, at the way he genuinely cared, and something solidified in her heart, something that had been silently growing, like cake batter that slowly expands in the heat of the oven. Later that night, with the girls finally asleep, Mia with her slightly sprained wrist properly bandaged, and her injured teddy bear held tightly, Isabella and Julian sat on the balcony of the apartment above the patisserie. "Thank you for today," she said simply, the words seeming insufficient to express the depth of her gratitude. Julian looked at her for a long moment, as if gathering his courage. "Isabella, I need to tell you something I've been holding on to for a while." She felt her heart race, a mixture of anticipation and fear filling her chest. "Over the past 2 years, I've watched you turn a devastating situation into something extraordinary. I've watched you build a business from nothing, raise 5 incredible girls, and inspire an entire community." He paused, searching for the right words, and in the process, without even realizing it, you've rebuilt something I thought was permanently broken. My ability to love again. The world seemed to hang in suspended animation as those words floated between them. Isabella felt silent tears slide down her cheeks, not tears of sadness or fear, but of recognition, of possibility, of a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Julian continued softly. "I just wanted you to know that if you're ready to open your heart again, I'll be here. I've been here all along." That night, lying in her bed, Isabella reflected on how life works in unexpected cycles. How what seems to be the end can, in fact, be just the prelude to something much grander. How sometimes everything has to fall apart so that it can be rebuilt on a more solid foundation. What she didn't yet know was that fate had one more twist in store, one that would close the cycle in an unexpected and definitive way. But that story was yet to come, patiently waiting for its moment to reveal itself. For now, there were 5 small breaths in the next room, a thriving patisserie below, a book with her name on the cover, and the possibility of a new love blossoming on her horizon. Sometimes life offers second chances. Sometimes those chances come disguised as catastrophes. And sometimes we only realize the true value of those opportunities when we look back and see the path traveled, with all its unexpected turns and seemingly senseless detours. After all, the most memorable cakes are not necessarily those that follow the recipe to the letter, but those that incorporate spontaneous adjustments and unexpected ingredients. Isabella was learning that the same holds true for life. The pink petals of the cherry blossoms danced in the air like tiny parachutes, covering the municipal park lawn with a delicate carpet. Isabella watched her 5 daughters, now just 3 years old, running among the flowering trees, their blonde hair shining under the spring sun. The girls' synchronized laughter filled the space like the purest of melodies. Have you ever had that feeling of looking at your life and almost not recognizing it? Not because it's unrecognizable, but because it has become more beautiful than you ever dared to dream? Isabella was living that moment as her fingers discreetly intertwined with Julian's, sitting beside her on the park bench. "They're tireless," he commented, genuine admiration coloring his voice. 5 little hurricanes." 5 little hurricanes with the precision of a tornado," Isabella replied, laughing when the quintuplets decided, in perfect synchrony, to change direction and run to the other side of the park. The last 12 months had brought transformations as significant as the first moments after the abandonment. Sweet Dreams was no longer just a local patisserie, but a growing brand. After the success of the recipe book, invitations for lectures and participation in food events came, and, most excitingly, the opportunity to open a second store in the state capital. But the most profound change was not in business. It was there, in the simplicity of those intertwined fingers, in the comfort of a shared silence, in the quiet certainty of having found not just a partner, but a life companion. The transition from friendship to romance with Julian had happened gradually, without haste. Respecting the time Isabella needed to heal old wounds. It began with dinners after the patisserie closed, evolved into weekend outings with the girls, and culminated, 3 months ago, with a hesitant kiss under the Christmas lights that decorated the city's central square. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked, noticing her contemplative gaze. "How unpredictable life is," she replied, watching Sophia, always the leader among the sisters, organize some kind of elaborate game. 3 years ago, I was lying on the kitchen floor, heartbroken, and with no idea how I would move forward. She didn't have to complete the thought. Julian gently squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of that transformation. "Mommy! Daddy Julian! Look what we found!" Emily, the most observant of the 5, ran toward him, holding something in her cupped hands. When she opened her hands, she revealed a small butterfly with vibrant blue wings, resting calmly on her palm. "She's hurt," Emily explained, her little face twisted with genuine concern. "We need to take care of her." The other 4 girls approached, forming a protective semicircle around their sister and the wounded butterfly. The scene touched Isabella deeply. The natural compassion of those children, their instinctive tendency to protect the vulnerable, to heal what was broken. "Where does this come from?" she had once asked the pediatrician during a routine checkup. "This sensitivity they have for the suffering of others." The doctor had smiled wisely. "Children mirror what they experience, Isabella. They were cared for with love, even in the most difficult circumstances. They are just giving back what they received." In the park, Julian knelt down to the girls' level, carefully examining the butterfly. "I think she's just resting," he explained gently. "Let's make a temporary home for her to recover, and then we'll let her fly again. What do you think?" The approval was unanimous, with 5 little heads nodding in agreement. That was another quality Isabella admired in Julian, his ability to communicate with the girls on their level, without ever underestimating their understanding or unnecessarily infantilizing them. As they walked back home, or more precisely, to the spacious apartment above the patisserie where they now lived, Isabella watched the interaction between Julian and the girls. How he perfectly balanced authority and affection. How he patiently answered the endless questions of Olivia, the most curious. How he respected the introspective moments of Mia, the quietest. How he enjoyed the fantastical stories of Charlotte, the the most imaginative. That night, after an lively dinner and the elaborate ritual of getting 5 girls ready for bed, baths, teeth brushing, bedtime stories, a different one for each according to their personalities, goodnight kisses, and final checks for non-existent monsters under the beds, Isabella found Julian in the kitchen making tea for them both. "Something special happened today," he commented casually, but there was a note in his voice that immediately captured Isabella's attention. "What was it?" Julian served the tea into 2 cups, taking his time. "I got a call from an old contact in the hotel industry, Laurent Dupont. Do you know him?" Isabella shook her head. "He's one of the biggest names in contemporary French gastronomy. He has a chain of boutique hotels with Michelin-starred restaurants in several European cities." Isabella's curiosity grew. And what did he want? "He's expanding into Latin America. He opened a hotel in Rio 6 months ago and is now looking for partners for the patisserie. He read your book, Isabella, and wants Sweet Dreams to be the exclusive dessert supplier for the hotel restaurant." The information hit Isabella like a wave. A partnership of that caliber would mean international visibility, completely new creative challenges, and expansive possibilities for her brand. She searched for the right word. "Extraordinary." "There's more," Julian continued, an enigmatic expression on his face. "Laurent doesn't just want your sweets. He wants you. Your name, your story, your presence. He proposed an exchange program. 3 months in Paris, learning advanced French pastry techniques, followed by the development of an exclusive line of desserts that blends European techniques with Brazilian flavors." Paris. The word came out as an incredulous whisper. 3 months in Paris. Isabella's mind immediately went in multiple directions. The professional opportunity was undeniably tempting. Paris, the epicenter of the global pastry world. Direct learning from masters of the craft, a global platform for her art. But then other thoughts arose. 3 months away from the girls was unthinkable. They had never spent more than a few hours separated from her. How would she manage the patisserie from a distance, and her still new relationship with Julian? As if reading her thoughts, Julian spoke up. "Before you start listing all the obstacles, Laurent was very clear. The invitation includes accommodations for you and the girls. And," he hesitated briefly, "for me if we want." Isabella looked at him, surprised. "You would drop everything for 3 months to go with us to Paris?" Julian's smile was calm, confident. "Isabella, I would drop everything permanently if I needed to be with you. 3 months in Paris? I can manage my business remotely, take a few short trips if necessary. It's no sacrifice at all." There was something in Julian's serene determination that made Isabella's heart swell. How different this mature love, built on a solid foundation of respect and mutual admiration, was from that first relationship that had ended so painfully. "I need to think," she said finally. "Talk to the girls, consider all the implications." "Of course," Julian agreed without hesitation. "Laurent doesn't expect an immediate answer. We have time." In the days that followed, Isabella oscillated between enthusiasm and apprehension. She consulted her team at the patisserie, who unanimously encouraged her. She talked to the quintuplets, using age-appropriate language, explaining about the city of lights and the country of croissants. To her surprise, the idea of an adventure abroad was met with childish excitement, especially when she mentioned that they could see the Eiffel Tower in person, just like in the illustrated book they loved so much. The final decision came during a quiet night, when Isabella was working in the patisserie kitchen after hours, experimenting with a new macaron recipe using typical Brazilian ingredients. Julian watched her silently from the doorway, admiring the concentration on her face, the precision of her movements. "I always knew you'd be great," he commented, finally approaching. "Ever since the first sweet I tasted in that corner of Mr. Green's bakery." Isabella smiled, without taking her eyes off the delicate macaron shell she was molding. "And you think I should accept?" "I think you've already decided," Julian replied softly. "You're just looking for confirmation." She stopped, looking at him with surprise at his insight. He was right. Deep down, the decision had already been made. Her adventurous spirit, her dedication to professional growth, her desire to offer her daughters enriching experiences, it all pointed to a single answer. "We're going to Paris," she finally declared, a quiet conviction in her voice. The preparation for the international stint was an organized whirlwind. Isabella developed new processes at the patisserie, ensuring that everything would run perfectly in her absence. The managers of her 2 stores received intensive training. Documents were prepared, vaccines updated, suitcases carefully packed. The farewell to Mr. Green, now with fragile health but an unshakable spirit, was especially emotional. The elderly baker, who was the first to believe in her talent when she herself doubted it, held her hands firmly. "I'm proud of you, dear," he said, unshed tears glistening in his tired eyes. "You're going to conquer Paris, just like you conquered our city." The flight back to Brazil was surprisingly smooth, with the quintuplets entertained by a collection of French books Laurent had insisted on giving them. Isabella used the time to finalize the designs for the wedding cake, a creation that would be her technical masterpiece, the culmination of everything she had learned in recent years, and especially in recent weeks in Paris. It wouldn't just be a cake, it would be a statement, not of resentment, but of triumph. Each layer, each detail, each nuance of flavor would tell the story of a woman who had turned abandonment into strength, despair into determination, and tears into something sweet. The arrival back in Brazil, was marked by a warm reception at the main patisserie. Isabella's team had grown significantly. There were now 2 stores in full operation, with a 3rd in the final stages of preparation and the prospect of the Parisian branch on the horizon. From a borrowed corner in Mr. Green's bakery to a small, sweet empire, the journey was almost unbelievable. "The bride and groom don't know you're back specifically to prepare the cake," Rosa, the head manager, informed Isabella as she updated her on the details of the order. "The bride, the daughter of a powerful family, has been visiting the patisserie regularly to discuss details, but always with the event assistant. He never came personally." "That's better," Isabella replied, examining the detailed notes. "I want it to be a surprise." The days that followed were filled with intense and focused work. Isabella practically moved into the patisserie kitchen, creating each element of the elaborate 5-tiered cake with meticulous precision. The quintuplets alternated between spending time with Mr. Green, who was radiant to see his princesses again, and watching their mother's creative process with fascination. "Why is this cake so special, Mommy?" asked Olivia, the most observant of the 5, noticing the unusual intensity with which Isabella worked. Isabella paused, considering how to explain something so complex to a 3-year-old. "Because it's for someone who is a part of our history," she finally replied. "Someone who helped us get to where we are today, even without knowing it." The answer seemed to satisfy the little one, who nodded with the adorable seriousness that only children can show when they think they're understanding adult matters. On the eve of the wedding, when the cake was almost finished, a work of art in 5 tiers, each symbolically representing a year since the abandonment, decorated with refined French techniques, but incorporating typical Brazilian flavors. Julian arrived from Paris. He entered the patisserie after closing time, finding Isabella putting the final touches on her masterpiece. The quintuplets were already asleep in the apartment above, exhausted after a day of playing. "It's magnificent," Julian commented, observing the cake with genuine admiration. "Worthy of a museum." Isabella smiled, stepping back slightly to evaluate her work with a critical eye. "It had to be perfect. May I ask why?" Julian's voice was soft, non-judgmental. "Why is it so important to impress him?" "I'm not trying to impress him," Isabella replied, after a moment of reflection. "I'm honoring my own journey. Each layer of this cake represents a year of growth, of overcoming adversity. The solid, wide base is the year everything fell apart, and I had to rebuild from scratch. The second tier represents the birth of the girls and the opening of the first patisserie. The third symbolizes the expansion, the recipe book, the public recognition. The fourth," she hesitated, a soft smile appearing on her lips. "The fourth represents you entering our lives, and the top, the fifth tier, represents Paris, the international expansion, the future that is opening up before us." Julian approached, hugging her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder as they both admired the creation. "And tomorrow, you will personally deliver this story to him." "Yes," Isabella confirmed, not as an accusation or a confrontation, but as a silent thank you. "His abandonment was the catalyst that forced me to discover a strength I didn't even know I possessed." The next morning, the cake was carefully transported to the luxurious hotel where the ceremony was to take place. The quintuplets, dressed in elegant pastel-coordinated dresses, the colors of the patisserie, accompanied Isabella along with Julian, who was impeccable in his well-tailored suit. The event team led them to a room adjacent to the main ballroom, where the cake would be kept refrigerated until the opportune moment. Isabella had insisted on personally making the final adjustments and assembly on site, ensuring absolute perfection. While working on the last details, she could hear the growing buzz of guests arriving, the soft music announcing the start of the ceremony, and eventually, the applause that indicated the conclusion of the vows. "It's time," the event coordinator announced, entering the room. "Can we bring the cake out now?" Isabella took a deep breath, exchanging a meaningful look with Julian, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "No," she replied calmly. "I'll take it myself." And so, with a heart that was strangely serene, Isabella prepared to close the last chapter of her past and open the doors to a future that 3 years ago she never would have dared to imagine. The ballroom shimmered under the glow of hundreds of golden lights, strategically positioned to create a fairy tale atmosphere. Elaborate floral arrangements in shades of white and champagne adorned each table, while satin ribbons danced softly with the occasional breeze from the ventilation systems. 200 elegantly dressed guests chatted animatedly, glasses of sparkling wine in hand, celebrating the union that had just been made official. Have you ever experienced that unique moment of absolute clarity, when time seems to slow down and every detail around you takes on an almost supernatural sharpness? That's exactly what Isabella experienced as she waited, her heart strangely calm, for the event coordinator's signal to enter the ballroom. "Remember what we agreed on?" she whispered to the quintuplets, kneeling to be at their level. 5 pairs of identical eyes stared at her with the adorable seriousness that only 3-year-olds can show when given an important mission. "Walk in quietly and stay close to Daddy Julian," Olivia, always the natural spokesperson for the group, replied. Isabella nodded, adjusting a loose ribbon on Mia's dress. The 5 girls were stunning in their pastel-coordinated dresses, each wearing the color that had become her signature since she was a baby. The system Isabella had developed to individualize without creating rivalries. Julian, standing a few steps behind with his characteristic, confident posture, offered an encouraging smile. "We're ready when you are," The event coordinator reappeared, slightly out of breath. It's the perfect moment. The bride and groom have just greeted the last guest in line and are heading to the main table. The master of ceremonies will announce the cake's entrance in exactly 2 minutes. Isabella took a deep breath, positioning herself behind the cart, where her masterpiece rested. The 5-tiered wedding cake told, in sugar and flour, the story of her personal metamorphosis. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every flavor carefully chosen to represent a facet of her journey. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the amplified voice of the master of ceremonies resonated through the ballroom. Let us prepare to receive the work of art that will sweeten this celebration of love. An exclusive cake from the internationally acclaimed patisserie, Sweet Dreams. The double doors opened, and Isabella, with the serene dignity of someone who knows her own worth, pushed the cart into the ballroom. The quintuplets followed right behind, in a perfectly aligned formation, their small hands holding individual miniatures of the main cake, an idea Isabella had had the night before, symbolizing how something great can be divided and still maintain its essence. The hum of conversation gradually ceased, replaced by murmurs of admiration as the guests noticed the magnificence of the creation. 5 tiers of confectionery perfection, each layer visually telling a story through refined decorating techniques, from the solid, structured base to the delicate crystallized sugar flour arrangement on top. A perfect fusion of Brazilian and French techniques. Isabella kept her eyes fixed on her path, guiding the cart with precision down the central aisle. Only when she reached the designated space near the main table did she allow herself to look up, directly at the face of the man who, 3 years ago, had destroyed and inadvertently rebuilt her life. The recognition was instantaneous and devastating. She saw the exact moment the color drained from his face, how his eyes widened in incredulous shock, how his hand instinctively sought support on the nearest table. Beside him, the bride, an elegant young woman in a French lace dress that had clearly cost a fortune, looked confused by her new husband's distraught expression. "Is everything all right, darling?" the bride asked, her voice revealing genuine concern. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed not just on Isabella, but on the 5 identical little figures who were now positioning themselves neatly beside the main cake, each one holding their miniature with evident pride. "Mommy made the most beautiful cake in the world," Olivia announced in her crystal-clear, childish voice, her completely innocent comment echoing in the sudden silence that had taken over the ballroom. The bride, still confused, looked from the girls to Isabella. "You're the head pastry chef? Are those your daughters? Are they quintuplets?" There was genuine admiration in her voice. "That's extraordinary. I always follow Sweet Dreams' work on social media, but I never imagined the owner would come personally." Isabella smiled gently. "Some projects are too special to delegate," she replied simply. Her ex-partner remained paralyzed, as if he had seen a ghost. Or 5. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. The ghosts of the future he had abandoned, now manifested in all their glory. "Do you know each other?" The bride was now realizing something more was going on, her gaze alternating between her immobilized husband and the serenely confident pastry chef. It was Emily, always the most observant of the quintuplets, who innocently broke the impasse. Pointing to the man in the impeccable suit, she asked loudly, "Mommy, is that the man from the old photo you kept in the special box?" The silence in the ballroom became palpable. Isabella felt the weight of 200 stares, but maintained her composure. Calmly, she adjusted one last sugar flower on top of the cake before answering. "Yes, dear," she confirmed softly. "That is the man who, without knowing it, gave us the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover our own strength." The transformation on the bride's face was extraordinary. Shock, then understanding, followed by an indignation that flushed her cheeks under the perfect makeup. "You abandoned her while she was pregnant?" she asked her minutes-old husband, her voice trembling slightly. "With quintuplets?" He finally found his voice, although he could barely articulate more than a few incoherent sounds. "I didn't know. Quintuplets. I didn't imagine." "No, you didn't know," Isabella agreed with serenity. "You left before I could tell you, and maybe that was for the best." Julian chose that moment to approach, positioning himself protectively beside Isabella and the girls. His tall, confident presence, his impeccable suit, and the natural way the quintuplets snuggled around him told their own silent story. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella announced, her clear voice reaching every corner of the room, "I've brought today not just a cake, but a message about transformation. Each tear of this creation represents a year of a journey that began in pain, but blossomed into immeasurable joy." Her eyes briefly met her ex-partner's before she continued. "This cake is my sincere gift to the bride and groom, not as a reminder of past mistakes, but as a celebration of how unexpected endings can lead to extraordinary beginnings." The bride, whose initial indignation now transformed into something more complex, approached the cake, observing it with new eyes. "It's truly magnificent," she commented softly. Then, turning to her husband with evident determination, "We need to talk, in private." As the couple walked away to a discreet corner of the ballroom, engaged in an intense conversation that involved the bride's exasperated gestures and his defensive posture, Isabella began to instruct the waiters on how to properly cut and serve the cake. It was at that moment that she felt a light touch on her arm. Turning, she met the gaze of the bride's mother, an elegant woman with keen eyes who seemed to be evaluating every detail of the situation. "My daughter has always admired your work," the woman commented, her voice low enough for it to be a private conversation amid the gradually returning buzz of the ballroom. "Now I understand that she should admire not just your creations, but your integrity." Isabella nodded in silent gratitude, understanding what was not being said. The woman respected her decision not to turn the celebration into a humiliating public confrontation, even though she had every justification to do so. "Sometimes," Isabella replied, "the greatest victory is simply living well." The woman smiled with quiet approval, before heading to where her daughter and son-in-law were still talking intensely. The quintuplets, having completed their mission of presenting the miniatures, were now sitting at a nearby table, charming the guests with their impressive resemblance and distinct personalities. Julian supervised from a distance, ready to intervene if the guests' enthusiasm became excessive. When the cake began to be served, something unexpected happened. The bride returned to the main table alone, without her new husband. With determined gestures, she removed the newly placed wedding ring and set it on the table before making a signal to the event coordinator. In a matter of minutes, a surprising announcement was made. The wedding was annulled. The celebration, however, would continue, not as a commemoration of a union, but as a party celebrating female courage and new beginnings, in the words of the bride herself. Isabella watched everything from a distance, with mixed feelings. It was never her intention to cause such a rupture, only to show her triumph over adversity to close a personal cycle. However, she recognized that each person had the right to set their own limits on what they could accept in a relationship. When it was time to leave, Isabella gathered her daughters, exhausted but happy after temporarily becoming the celebrities of the party. Julian efficiently organized their departure, demonstrating the calm competence that characterized him. At the ballroom door, they were surprised by the bride, or ex-bride, who caught up with them with hurried steps. "Wait," she asked, something indefinable shining in her eyes. I didn't come to apologize for him. I came to thank you. Isabella watched her. Curious. You saved me today, the young woman continued, sincere emotion touching her voice. Not just from a marriage to a man capable of abandoning his family, but from a life built on lies. If he could hide something so significant from his past, what other truths would remain hidden? Before Isabella could reply, the young woman knelt down to the quintuplets' level. You are very special girls, you know. You have the most courageous mother in the world. As she stood up, she handed a business card to Isabella. I'm a curator at an art gallery. When you're ready to exhibit your creations as the true works of art they are, please get in touch. And so, with one last bittersweet smile, the young woman returned to her reinvented celebration, leaving Isabella with an unexpected connection, born from the ashes of failed relationships. In the limousine on the way to the hotel, where they would stay before returning to Paris, the quintuplets quickly fell asleep, exhausted by the day's intensity. Isabella rested her head on Julian's shoulder, finally allowing herself to relax. So, he murmured, gently kissing her hair. How do you feel? Isabella considered the question, searching her heart for the most honest answer. Free, she finally replied, as if the last thread tying me to the past has been cut, as if I can now fly without any weight pulling me down. Julian intertwined his fingers with hers, the simple gesture loaded with silent promises. And where will we fly now, with our 5 little navigators? Isabella smiled, the image of the future forming clearly in her mind. Paris first, to finish the exchange. Then that house on the hills with the big garden and space to grow, an international branch of sweet dreams. And maybe, she hesitated briefly, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. Maybe a small ceremony, just for us and the people who are truly special. Julian's smile lit up his entire face. That sounds like the perfect plan. As the limousine glided through the illuminated streets, Isabella observed the sleeping profiles of her daughters. Of all the recipes she had ever created, this was, without a doubt, the most extraordinary. The recipe for turning abandonment into strength, tears into determination, and a devastating ending into a glorious new beginning. The world of baking teaches a fundamental truth that applies equally to life. Sometimes, you have to completely break the ingredients, eggs, nuts, barriers, hearts, to create something truly transcendent. The art lies in knowing how to recombine the fragments into something more beautiful and stronger than the original. 3 years ago, when her world collapsed in that kitchen, hearing the cruel words, "You'll never make it alone," Isabella would never have imagined being where she was now. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but shining. And perhaps this is the sweetest lesson of all. Endings are not really endings, but simply doors to new beginnings. The true taste of victory is not in proving something to someone who hurt you, but in proving to yourself that the journey was worth every tear. Every sleepless night, every obstacle overcome. As she closed her eyes, nestled in Julian's protective embrace, Isabella felt a profound peace envelop her. The cycle was complete. The story had found not an ending, but a perfect evolution. And the future, like a cake not yet baked, awaited with all its infinite possibilities. After all, life, like baking, is both science and art, part precise technique, part spontaneous inspiration. And Isabella had mastered both dimensions, creating her most significant masterpiece, a full life built with love, courage, and that secret ingredient that turns the ordinary into the extraordinary, the untamable resilience of the human spirit. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you're a new reader, remember to subscribe for more content like this. And if you have a favorite part, Share it in the comments below.